Welcome to episode 78 of Tales from the Hangman's Record. My name is Steve Fielding. All the stories are taken from my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record, covering every execution in Great Britain and Ireland between 1868 and 1964. Copies of these and many of my other titles can be obtained through my website stevefielding.com. If you enjoy the video, can you please subscribe to the channel, and if you can spare £1 or £2 to help it continue to grow by clicking the thanks button on the YouTube video or with the link paypal.me/thehangmansrecord, that will be greatly appreciated. And as always, use the comments below for your thoughts on the case, whether justice was seen to be done, and suggestions for future episodes in this series. In today's tale from the Hangman's Record, we travel back to 1933. In world events, Adolf Hitler is appointed Chancellor of Germany, Franklin D. Roosevelt is sworn in as the 32nd President of the United States, and the Irish Free State abolishes the oath of allegiance to the British Crown. In America, the Prohibition Act is repealed, and in Hollywood the movie King Kong becomes the first feature film to use stop-motion animation. The first modern sighting of the Loch Ness Monster is recorded in Scotland, whilst in London the tube diagram map is revealed and actors Sir Michael Caine and twins Ronnie and Reggie Kray are born. The Young Persons Act raises the age of criminal responsibility from 7 to 8, the minimum age to be liable to the death penalty is set at 18, and anyone below the age of 16 is forbidden to buy cigarettes. And in the English Midlands, a young grocery driver joins a select list of men carrying out a very secret and skilled job that had been refined and perfected over the last 60 or so years. There was never a shortage of applicants for the post of public hangman throughout the 20th century, and even after it was suspended in the 1960s, folk still sent in letters asking how to apply in the belief it may be reintroduced. In the early 19th century, most of the county prisons would call upon their own executioner, or in some instances offer a remission in sentence for any prisoner willing to undertake the task. The method was often crude and basic, with a rope being fastened to a beam and the culprit falling just a few feet and dying from painful strangulation. But as death by hanging was carried out in public and meant to be a deterrent, there was little in the way of complaint, save for one or two literary figures like Charles Dickens, who wrote of their distaste in witnessing a public execution in national newspapers. With the advent of rail travel, more prisons around the country began to call upon the services of the London hangman, William Calcraft, and soon he was a regular visitor to all parts of the United Kingdom and occasionally crossed the water in Ireland. Quite why Calcraft's services should be in demand is questionable. He was no more skilled than any of the regional executioners, and his favoured short drop method of execution meant most of the people he hanged died slowly and in great agony. When the Private Executions Act was passed in 1868, public executions were outlawed, and henceforth all sentences would be carried out away from public view behind the high prison walls. Within a few years, Calcraft was pensioned off. A new scientific and more humane method of execution, using a longer drop designed to dislocate the prisoner's neck, causing paralysis and almost instant death, was being used, and a pioneer of this method, Lincolnshire shoemaker William Marwood, soon took over as the country's chief executioner. Using a table devised by the hangman, the prisoner would be given a drop relative to his age and weight. The aim was for the drop to be long enough to cause the neck to break, but not too long as to cause death by decapitation, which happened on one or two occasions in the late Victorian era, as the hangman strived to perfect their skills. Marwood died in 1883, after almost a decade as the chief hangman, and the Home Office were immediately flooded with applicants from all walks of life asking to replace him. A shortlist was drawn up, and those chosen were invited down to London for an interview. The man picked to replace Marwood was Bartholomew Binns, a railway foreman from Dewsbury. Within a year, his reign as the chief executioner ended, following a series of botched hangings and his questionable character. Former police constable James Berry, unsuccessful in his initial application, now became the chief executioner, and for a few years went about his business in a calm, professional manner. Berry was censured by prison authorities when he took it upon himself to visit the prisoner on the eve of execution and read them some religious verse. Following a number of complaints, he was ordered to stop. Gradually the role began to take effect on Berry. He took to drinking heavily, and following a run-in with prison authorities in Liverpool, following the execution where a man's head was almost torn off, he tendered his resignation. James Billington was another who had missed out when Binns was engaged in 1883, but since 1884 he had been the regular hangman at Leeds Armley Jail. He now took over from Berry and was often assisted by his eldest son Thomas. In 1899, William Billington, James's middle son, turned up at Lincoln Prison instead of his father, who was too sick to travel. Up to this point, William Billington had not officiated or participated at an execution. None the wiser, Billington was allowed to perform his duties as chief executioner, but the prison noted he didn't seem to have a clue how to secure the noose to the beam correctly. Although the execution was carried out in the correct manner, the authorities initially refused to pay, citing he wasn't on the approved list of executioners. This incident, following on from the dubious appointments and unsavoury incidents since the passing of the 1868 Act, caused the prison authorities to order a complete overhaul and how the hangmen were appointed. Henceforth, all would-be applicants would be first interviewed at their local prison. This would weed out those whose interest was in any way macabre or ghoulish. At the same time, the local police would make discreet inquiries into their character, and any who failed at this stage found their application rejected. Those successful in interview would then be invited down to Newgate Jail for a week's intensive training, where they were taught all aspects of the job and warned about the official secrets and not to discuss their appointments in the press. More than one successful applicant suddenly found their name removed, following a mention in the newspapers of their appointment. Successful graduates would be expected to be able to carry out a full execution if called upon, and in 1902, newly appointed Henry Pierrepoint was engaged as a chief executioner at Shrewsbury after assisting at just 2 executions. Throughout the next quarter of a century, new applicants were added to the list as others dropped off, some after assisting at just 1 or 2 hangings before finding it wasn't a job they were comfortable with. Then, in 1928, an unfortunate incident occurred that called for another change in procedure. In December 1928, hangman Robert Baxter was engaged to carry out the execution of a 20-year-old Welsh coal miner, Trevor Edwards, who had murdered his sweetheart by cutting her throat. Baxter had with him a new assistant, Alfred Allen, participating in his first execution. Once Edwards was led to the scaffold, Baxter was very quick in noosing the prisoner and pushing the lever. Unfortunately for Allen, who was fumbling a little in strapping the ankles, he was not able to get clear of the doors and followed Edwards into the pit. He was fortunate to avoid serious injury, with just his pride hurt, and although the incident was recorded in the papers, no blame was attached, with the governor claiming the accident was a mixture of the hangman's alacrity and Allen's slightly defective vision. The last part of the claim was inaccurate. It was Baxter, not Allen, who suffered from a defective vision and was blind in one eye. Baxter made a statement to the governor that morning and claimed that Allen had not stepped back far enough. I think it is because the trapdoors are much wider than those at Pentonville, and therefore he fell down into the pit. When word reached London of the incident, it was decided to hold an internal inquiry into the incident, and Baxter was summoned to Pentonville on the 18th of January 1929 for a medical examination and to make a more detailed statement on the incident. Examined by prison doctors, they found that Baxter was free from organic disease and both physically and mentally fit to act as an executioner. A memo was issued outlining the actual method of execution as carried out in 1928. Executioner walks to the scaffold in front of the condemned man. As the prisoner stands on the chalk mark on the drop, the executioner places the cap over the head, then places the noose around the neck, adjusts and then tightens it, steps back towards the lever and pulls when the engineer draws out the safety pin. Assistant executioner walks immediately behind the condemned man to the scaffold with the leg strap in his hand. As soon as the prisoner is on the chalk mark, he fastens the leg strap from behind and steps back. Foreman of works observes movement of both and when all clear, signals to the engineer, who withdraws the safety pin. From experience, this is perfect timing, and usually the assistant executioner has finished the job and steadied the prisoner from behind. There is no signal between the executioner and assistant, but I have never seen Baxter fail to look down quickly to see the leg strap is on and the assistant is standing clear. The incident was concluded with the findings that Allen had taken fractionally longer than normal, possibly due to nerves, that he'd gotten the leg strap tangled when he first put it around the culprit's legs. Also, the floor at Swansea Gallows was new. The trapdoors were wider than those in the old-style gallows, such as at Pentonville, that there was no discernible mark to show where the trapdoor ended and the floor began. It was noted that there had been discussions in outlining the edges of the trap, and that, in this instance, it was decided not to whiten the edges as it may cause distress to the prisoner when walking onto what was clearly the trapdoor. Henceforth, an outline should be made on the scaffold if it would avoid a repeat of the Swansea incident. In conclusion, Major Benck noted, "I have every faith in Baxter's efficiency and was quite impressed with Allen during the trials." Despite this incident, no blame was attached and Baxter was allowed to continue as the chief executioner for London, the South and the occasional trips to Scotland, Ireland and Gibraltar. Alfred Allen's name was also kept on the official list of hangmen. The most significant decision to come from this incident was that, on Baxter's recommendation, all future assistants that passed from the training school would witness an execution as an observer. This meant they played no active part in the proceedings, merely watched the hangman as he rigged the drop on the day before, carry out the hanging on the day, and familiarise with all the rigmarole of removing the prisoner from the rope, preparing the body for post-mortem or interment, and then dismantling and packing away the apparatus. Albert Pierrepoint was born on the 30th of March 1905 at Payne, Bradford in the north of England, the middle child of hangman Harry Pierrepoint and his wife Mary. Following the death of his father in 1922, Albert, as the oldest son, became the breadwinner, working in the mills until the end of the 1920s, when he took a job as a delivery man at a wholesale grocer's. At the age of 26, Pierrepoint wrote to the Home Office applying to be a hangman. "Dear Sir, I beg to offer you my services as assistant executioner to my uncle, T.W. Pierrepoint, at any time he or any other retire from their position. My age is 26. I am strong in health and build, and during the last few years I have thoroughly studied the carrying out of an execution and the calculating of drops, etc., learned from the diary of my late father, Mr. H.A. Pierrepoint. Hoping this letter will meet with your kind approval, I am, dear Sir, your obedient servant, Albert Pierrepoint, 41 Mill Street, Failsworth, Manchester." In due course he attended Manchester Strangeways Prison, where the governor recommended that he was a suitable applicant to be sent for training. Pierrepoint received instruction alongside Londoner Stanley Cross at Pentonville, and both graduated at the end of 1932. They were then informed that although now qualified to assist at an execution, they would first be required to witness one as an observer. Not only was this to prevent a repeat of the Allen incident, but it was also a test to see if their nerve would hold, and that they would not become ill or faint at the sight of someone being executed. 3 offers then landed on Albert Pierrepoint's doormat in December. The first was to witness the execution at Hull of domestic servant Kate Collins, who had drowned her illegitimate newborn child, but she was reprieved just a week after sentence was passed. Engagements at Durham and Birmingham also came to nothing, and just when it appeared the year would end without the chance to put his skills into practice, Pierrepoint received a handwritten offer to assist his Uncle Tom at Dublin's Mount George prison on Thursday the 29th of December 1932. Patrick McDermott was a 26-year-old farmer convicted of the murder of his brother. In the early hours of Monday, the 4th of September, John McDermott was found shot in the gateway to their home 7 miles from Roscommon. Hearing 2 gunshots, his brother and sister with whom he lived rushed from the house and found John dead from wounds seemingly inflicted with a double-barrel shotgun. John was the eldest of the children, and all 3 had separate rooms in the house. Their father had died 2 years earlier, and John had taken charge of the farm with £700. So the 2 children were left £100 each. On the night of the murder, John had left the house and gone to visit a friend. He was shot as he returned home. Detectives investigating the crime asked Patrick if he had seen a flash of fire when he heard the shots, and he said he could not see the spot where his brother had died from the window. This was found to be untrue. He denied having a gun, but a friend told police that he had recently borrowed his gun, allegedly to shoot crows that were attacking his crops. 3 days after the murder of John McDermott, police charged his younger brother. At his 4-day Dublin trial, it was alleged the motive was that Patrick could inherit the farm, which he intended to sell, and use the money to emigrate to America. Presenting his young nephew to the prison governor, Tom Pierrepoint was given the details of the prisoner, and after breakfast they were taken to the scaffold to make the necessary preparations. Although his uncle had told him everything about the job, there was no attempt to build up any importance in Albert's role in the execution. He was to help secure the wrists if needed, but primarily to strap the ankles when the condemned man was on the drop before stepping back as fast as he could. At a few minutes before 8, with all the preparations having been carried out, Albert stood beside his uncle and waited. As the minute hand rolled over to the hour, the signal was given and they went to work. After a few short paces, they reached the scaffold. Albert dropped to his knees, secured the man's ankles as he had practiced scores of times. With barely time to regain his balance after stepping off the drop, there was a loud bang and then silence. The rope hung straight and true, and Patrick McDermott was dead. In January 1933, Albert wrote to the Home Office advising them that although he had yet to formally witness the execution in England, he had acted as an assistant in Ireland. By return, the Home Office wrote that he would still be required to act as an official witness at an execution before he could be offered the chance to formally assist in Great Britain. Within the week, another letter landed on the mat, offering Albert the chance to witness an execution in Birmingham. Jeremiah Hanbury had been friends with James and Jessie Payne for several years and was a frequent visitor to their home at 11 The Lays, Newton Brockmore, near Brierley Hill in the West Midlands. 49-year-old Hanbury was a widower and had worked as a foundry puddler before becoming unemployed. Sometime in the summer of 1929, Hanbury had begun a secret affair with 39-year-old Mrs. Payne, the mother of 4 children. At the end of July 1932, Jessie told Hanbury she wanted to end the relationship. He took the news badly, and despite a number of requests for her to change her mind, she refused. Hanbury suspected he had been replaced in Jessie's affections by another man, Bert Eardley. He reported his suspicions to Jessie's husband, and although she admitted to having sex with Hanbury, she claimed that he had forced himself upon her. When Payne confronted Hanbury about this, he denied those claims, but admitted he had often paid Jessie for sex and suspected that Eardley was now doing the same. On Monday afternoon, the 17th of October, Hanbury called at the house and, finding Jessie Payne alone, struck her 2 blows with a hammer, knocking her unconscious. He then picked up a razor and cut her throat so severely she was almost decapitated. After making an attempt to cut his own throat, he staggered out into the street, muttering, "Jerry had revenge, Jerry's had revenge." A large crowd watched as he staggered down the street, where he soon gave himself up to a policeman. At his trial before Mr. Justice Humphreys at Birmingham Assizes on the 8th of December, it was suggested that Hanbury, although hard-working and a previous good character, was unstable at times and inclined to be quarrelsome. There was no doubt Hanbury was guilty, but was he insane at the time of the crime? When he gave himself up and was placed under arrest, he told officers he could remember nothing of the events of that afternoon. His counsel told the court that when a previous relationship had ended bitterly, Hanbury had tried to take his own life, and there was also a history of insanity in the family. As a result, he had become depressed, and it was during this depression he had committed murder. Despite this, he was found guilty and sentenced to death. An appeal against conviction was launched, but was quickly rejected, and a new date of execution fixed. With the young Pierrepoint still unable to witness an execution, and following his letter to the Home Office, it was decided he could be present as a second assistant at the execution of Jeremiah Hanbury. The memo specifically stated that he was to play no active part. Albert Pierrepoint refers to this case in his autobiography, in which he calls the prisoner Gerald Hutchins. With the request granted, Pierrepoint arrived at the prison on Wednesday afternoon, the 1st of February 1933, in the company of his uncle, where they met up with the assistant Robert Wilson. Pierrepoint recalled how he had arrived at the prison just as Hanbury's relatives were leaving. An officer present at the farewell interview said that the prisoner had told his sister to pull down the blind on the kitchen window a moment before 8 o'clock on the following morning, the time of the execution. He asked her to release it as the clock struck the hour and say, "Poor old Jerry, now he's gone." Pierrepoint said that the condemned man had aroused no disgust in the prison officers, who all called him Jerry and who had treated him with courtesy and respect. He also states in his book that he had come to an arrangement with the assistant Robert Wilson, allowing him to take an active part in the execution. Official reports show clearly that this was not the case. Hanbury spent the last hours singing loudly in his cell and asked the governor for a large breakfast of bacon and eggs, as he needed the energy because he was about to embark on a long journey. "Be good, everyone," he said to the guards as the hangman entered the cell, and as his arms were strapped, he turned to the governor, "And thank you, sir, for all your trouble." Reaching the drop, Wilson swiftly strapped the ankles and stepped back as Tom Pierrepoint pushed the lever. The prison governor noted that the trainee observer had given no cause for concern, and Pierrepoint Jr. had now satisfied the authorities he was suitable to act as a bona fide assistant. Albert Pierrepoint continued as an assistant, mostly to his uncle, for the next 7 years, before graduating to a chief executioner in the early part of World War II, when he hanged Antonio Mancini, a case we featured in episode 5 of this series. Look out for another episode on the Pierrepoint family coming soon on this channel. You have been watching another tale from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.